This little
Okay, we're
box
not
is...
recording, Marjorie, so whatever you say is on public record.
Oh. Well, I'll try to keep my political comments down, or I won't predict the baseball score tonight. I swear I got like 8 emails today. Are you kidding? The Yankees are going to win tonight. Blah blah blah. All the New Yorker friends of mine.
Well, it's like, why couldn't they have won like 2 games ago?
I don't know. Makes it more
Just end it.
interesting. I don't know. Goes on. The drama goes on. They're not getting a lot of sleep in Philadelphia, New York. I know that. Plus, it was a full moon.
Yeah, sure.
Maybe you can explain that to me. Why do people say you don't sleep with a full moon? You haven't heard that?
Yeah, I've heard it before. I mean, my guess would just be because it's more light coming in.
Yeah, well, that's a good answer. That's what I would say.
Makes sense. I mean, one of our colleagues here, her husband is a cop, and we are actually thinking of having him do a webcast to talk about what it's like to be a cop during a full moon.
Oh, I think that'd be cool. And I've heard ER docs have a lot to say about that. Yeah.
We might have to find an ER cop.
There you go.
Or an ER doctor.
There you go. Well, here we have somebody commented here. Yeah, I think a lot of people think there's a physical connection, but who knows?
I've come across that too. Yeah, it's interesting. I taught a year at high school, and we talked about the lunar phases. I would talk about in terms of the monthly cycle, the phases. Said that one time, and I lost the class for about 5 minutes because I thought that was the funniest thing I'd ever heard. So I learned right away not to use that particular phrase. He talked about the moon phases.
There you go.
Well, that's a good question, Starman. I am at the Lunar and Planetary Institute in Houston, as where I'm coming from you tonight. Marjorie, where are you at tonight?
I'm in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, near Charleston. And your Starman is in Denver, I think.
Yeah, I think that'd be safe to say. Yeah, typically during the webcast, I'll be here in Houston. Our speakers are wherever they're at, whether it's, let's see, we had somebody from Washington, D.C. one time, somebody from California. So they're really just, wherever our speaker happens to be at that time doing the webcast, that's where they are. So it's pretty cool that we can use this kind of technology to be able to do this.
It helped that you sent the microphone.
Good. I'm sorry?
It helped that you sent the mic and the camera.
The microphone? Yeah, well, that helps too, yeah. Well, let's go ahead and get started. I think it's probably about that time. So, again, welcome everybody to tonight's webcast. Tonight we will be speaking with Marjory Wentworth, who is the Poet Laureate of South Carolina. And she will be talking to us tonight about poetry and a little more specifically how the moon ties into her work and even the work of other poets. So with that, I'll give it to you, Marjorie.
Oh, okay. Well, thanks. It's been interesting since I posted this broadcast on Facebook and sent emails, and almost every poet I know said, I have a moon poem. I have a bunch of moon poems. So I think it's a pretty universal theme in poetry and historically and in all kinds of great poems. And it's fun to kind of look for the moon in almost every book of poems I can find. It's there. It's just some kind of metaphor, often to do with the heart, I think, or the state of mind of the writer. So, I mean, there's a lot to talk about. I think hopefully some poets are signed on. But do you want me to read a poem or have a question or what, Andrew?
Yeah, go ahead and read a couple. I think that'd be great.
Okay. I noticed that when I lived on an island, I wrote much more about the moon. I have 2 books out and another book coming out, and the first book is largely these poems set on a barrier island, and the moon's in almost every poem. And I think that's because there's just this natural connection because of the tides and the hearing the tides all the time, and then there's just that solitary quality of seeing the moon in the sky and then being an island. You don't think about it, but I just used it all the time in poetry. So the first poem I'm going to read is called Hurricane Season, and there's an epigraph at the beginning by Pat Conroy. He's a great novelist from South Carolina, and it's "My wound is my geography, hurricane season. The blood moon thirsts all night, listening to unspoken prayers. She tugs the sea beyond itself until redundant waves retreating wash the yellowed marshes clean. In the heat that follows too much rain, people crowd the churches. On this September Sunday morning, their hymns begin to rise and slap the wind still raging. This is the music of bones entwined in mortal language, words of those who know the wind erases every footprint carved in earth, where water, tired as a dreamer, circling beneath oblivious clouds, blurs the variations painted on each human face. Into the open womb of the sea descend the ashes of our sins. What keeps us here? Not gravity or light, but rust on fences holding every house of swollen wood, an ache, a tooth, the day moon adrift, grinding tiny islands down to bone. I chose that poem just because I think it brings in a lot of the elements of the natural world on the island and the sense of the forces of nature that are always at work on an island. And I just think so much of it has to do with that constant gravitational pull and the tides. And it's just, even if someone didn't explain it to you and you live near the sea, I think you'd know that, perhaps. I don't know. I think so. What do you think, Andrew?
I think that sounds perfectly reasonable to me. Now,
well, it's, you know,
I grew up in Kansas in the middle of the country, so I was still like a half hour away from the nearest big lake, so I never really got to experience tides growing up.
Well, you know, I can remember living on this island when there would be storms, and of course the big fear was that a storm would make landfall and there would be a full moon and a high tide, because that's the worst thing that can happen. And I do remember a storm. It wasn't a hurricane, but there was all this flooding right near our house, and I remember going to pick my kids up at preschool in a bathing suit. I mean, that's how bad the flooding was. But it was all because it had come in with the high tide and the moon was full. So that's part of why it figures in my poems, because you feel that presence much more when you're in a tiny island, and you're constantly hearing. You always hear the sea. You know, on one side it's accreting, on one side it's eroding, and I noticed the moon more when I lived there. Now I live in a town with more light. There's more light in the sky. I don't notice it as much. But Starman thinks it's psychological. Now, how do I handle this when I get questions in the chat? Should I answer them automatically, or what are the rules, Andrew?
The rules are there are no rules. If you
we make the rules.
Yeah, if one comes up and you see it and you'd like to address it, then yeah, go ahead. Sure.
Well, Katie asked, where have I visited that inspired me most? I think that's a really good question. I guess that island that I lived on inspired me most, especially now that I don't live there. I'd never written so many poems set in the natural world as when I did live there. And I lived in New York City for 10 years before that and hardly set any poems in New York City. So even though it was a very interesting place to live. It was Sullivan's Island. Someone just asked that, what island? Sullivan's Island, which is a barrier island off of Charleston. And there's a fort there. It's right near Fort Sumter, which is where the Civil War, started right there. But it's only, as I said before, I think a half a mile wide and 5 miles long. It's actually where the slave ships used to land there and unload the Africans and keep them there for weeks at a time, almost like under quarantine, and then they would move them down to Charleston and sell them. So it has a, strange history, difficult history. That's right off Charleston.
One of the questions that came into us ahead of time says, where did your line "moon in a nest of stars" come from?
Moon in a nest of stars. Together, moon and there's actually a poem that I wrote called "The Nest of Stars," which was also set on the island. Give me a second. I don't remember the moon being attached to it, so I better check. It's kind of an old poem. Well, why don't I read that? It's a very short 6-line poem that I wrote when one of my friends that I'd grown up with and lived with after college, the night I found out she died. And we were only about 30, early 30s at the time. The Nest of Stars. The night she died, stars were nesting near my window. The wind was so still that echoes of the sea were the only sounds rising from the earth until the howl of one human heart filled the universe. I think that's how anyone feels when they lose someone. But that title, interestingly enough, came from, I was reading Yeats, and I thought that's what it said. In a Yeats poem, it's not exactly what it said. It said some variation on that statement, but for some reason in my imagination that's what it said, and I just wrote the poem. It was just one of those, I was reading and writing at the same, and I wrote The Nest of Stars. So a little bit of Yeats, but not exactly. If that makes sense. Like a variation. I forget that original phrase, but.
Well, that was very nice. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
The other question we had is, have you ever been staring at an object, whether it's the moon, a flower, whatever, and just got this sudden urge to write about it, and then did?
Sure. I'm glad that question went that way. I thought it was going to be one of those, and then you felt like you became the flower or something. I always hear people talk about that, and I don't not quite have that experience when I write. I have a little distance. Sure. I remember I teach on Block Island in Rhode Island every spring. They have these great poetry workshops up there every spring. And I was there looking at chickweed and all the different tiny little plants, and just found myself writing about them, and the poem that resulted is going to be in my next book. But I think I was so interested in the objects there because spring is so profound in a place that's more north than here, and any little thing blooming is a big deal. So that's just something that comes to mind because I was just working on that poem. And a lot of the imagery in my poems comes from observation of plant life and animals. I used to run a great deal, and a lot of the imagery in my poetry, the birds and the plants and what have you, butterflies, certain kinds of butterflies, came from just the objects I saw. And I'm never one to wear headphones when I'm running because I like to hear everything and notice I like to hear the natural world, and I don't want to get hit by a car either. I wouldn't hear. Here's the question. When did I begin writing poetry? Probably when I was about 12 years old, maybe sixth grade. Is that sixth grade? Seventh grade, eighth grade. And I find going around to schools, and I actually taught middle school for a while, that's pretty standard, that kids start writing poems in middle school. There's a lot you're trying to express at that age, and it's a kind of a natural outlet. Worked for me.
That's kind of interesting, because that's about the same age that a lot of girls begin to lose interest in science.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't think there's a correlation there, but I was always interested in science. I used to want to be a doctor, and I loved science. Katie just asked if I still have any of the first poems that I wrote. Yes, they're really embarrassing, but they I was born in 1958, so I used to write these poems that rhymed, and not that rhyming's bad, but I think I thought I was Bob Dylan or something, Oh. Andrew asked about weather, part of nature. Do I write a lot about natural? Oh, yes, absolutely. I think weather really affects our moods. I love to write about snow, because I don't live in the Northeast anymore, so I have really intense memories of snow. And I moved to South Carolina with my family a month before a Category 4 hurricane made landfall. So weather's a big deal when you live down here, and I saw the effects of that. We weren't able to live in our house for a year. So yes, I do write a lot about weather and the moods that weather, that go along with it, I guess.
Yeah, to answer Starman's question about the weather here, yeah, it was raining crazy last week. But ever since about, I think, Saturday, it's been great. It's pretty much been cloudless. Highs have been in the 70s. It's been relatively low humidity for Houston. It's been a great past 4 or 5 days, and it's supposed to continue like that through the weekend at least.
Weren't there like floods in Arkansas and stuff? I was reading about that. Maybe that was when you had all that rain. Yeah, in the south.
I say it tends to flood pretty easily in a lot of areas down here too. So.
Yeah. We've gotten away from the moon.
Well, that's okay. That's not a problem. Well, okay. Well, here's one I can guess back on the moon. Question.
Oh, cool.
Question that came in. Asking, as a child, did you dream about the moon?
Wow, did anyone remember if they dreamed about? Oh, I don't know. I don't know how to answer that. That's a really interesting question. Because I think the moon, the man in the moon, and the things we're told when we're children about the moon, and I don't know. I mean, I was a child, I don't know, maybe 5th grade when, the moon landing happened, and boy, that was a big deal. And I can remember, one really distinct memory I have are those first pictures we had of the Earth, and being, a kid seeing those pictures. I mean, I think all that stuff really influenced our psyche, our whole sense of ourselves, as human beings. So probably I did. I don't remember particularly, though.
Yeah,
interesting questions, Andrew.
Sorry?
Interesting questions.
Yes, they are, yeah. One of our scientists here at LPI always talks about how when we got like those first images back from the astronauts going around the moon, where it was just the Earth just hanging there in space, that really is attributed to the beginning of the environmentalist movement. Because up until that point, we had never seen the Earth from that perspective, and all of a sudden it became this really fragile thing just hanging out
it
there
looks
in
so
space.
right. Yeah, it really hits you, and that's what I mean. I've read some of the passages that some of those astronauts have written, both Russian and American, and they all say that. I mean, it's fascinating. Some of the books that NASA's put out. Oh, someone says they're having trouble hearing me. I don't know. Well, my mic is up as loud as it'll go, so I don't know what I can do, but I can talk louder.
I think you're doing fine. Just keep going.
Okay. Okay. Oh, well, Katie said she can hear me. All right. I don't know. Any more questions, or you want me to read a poem?
Yeah, we'll go ahead and you can read one of your own, or you mentioned you had some from some other people. You could get like kind of some funny ones. I think that'd be kind of interesting to hear.
Yeah, well, it's funny. There's a funny American poet named Billy Collins, and I saw him about a month ago. He was in Charleston, and we all got together, and so I was reading his poems, and he has a lot of poems about the moon, and he has one called "A Man in the Moon," and I wanted to read that because it's just a whole different style, and he said that his ex-wife, or no, his estranged wife, said it was his feminist poem, so maybe we can figure that out. "The Man in the Moon" by Billy Collins. He used to frighten me in the nights of childhood, the wide adult face, enormous, stern, aloft. I could not imagine such loneliness, such coldness. But tonight as I drive home over these hilly roads, I see him sinking behind stands of winter trees and rising again to show his familiar face. And when he comes into full view over open fields, he looks like a young man who has fallen in love with the dark earth, a pale bachelor, well-groomed and full of melancholy, his round mouth open as if he had just broken into the song. Sweet. I like that poem. I don't think it's really one of his funny ones. I don't know why it's a feminist poem, but anyway, I like it. And we were talking before about dreaming and the associations we had. You know, I don't even know where that Man in the Moon myth or whatever it is comes from. I think it comes from people thinking they saw a face, right? So.
Yeah, and there's actually quite a number of stories about figures that are seen in the moon, including the Man in the Moon, that come from various cultures across the world. In fact, we had a speaker in September, Lynn Maroney, who's a Choctaw Indian descent, actually was talking about that specifically. And we'll have on our MyMoon website, we'll have an exhibit, an online virtual exhibit with some of these stories about the different things that are seen in the moon. And some of them are really interesting stories.
Yeah, probably a lot of, I'm sure it's like a lot of things that's cross-culturally, there's a lot of similarities. I mean, the other thing that I think is interesting in terms of poetry, poems have to have a little bit of mystery. I mean, not everything is explained. You know, the reader has to have a little bit of room to enter with their imagination, and poems work, you know, on the power of suggestion, almost like a dream, because we were talking about dreams before. And isn't it true that we don't ever quite see, we think we see the whole moon when we see a full moon, but we're seeing parts of it. So I think that also, that sort of mystery of we know there's this, we can only see part of it, but we know the rest of it's there. And I think that's something I noticed in a lot of poems, that captures people's imaginations, and it is an odd thing because you know you're only seeing part of it. It's just and you know, also I think just the whole cyclical nature of the moon and the way, you know, we pay attention to it. I see that in a lot of poetry. Not in the way, I mean, you don't see that for any other object in the sky. I mean, people say something about stars or the sun, but that's all you can say. There's not the same level of mystery and that constant dynamic change, which I think is just, it's always different.
Yeah, there's a really interesting question there from Alan.
Yeah, I'm reading that now. How have poetic images of the moon changed as our scientific understanding of the moon has changed? Has moon fact killed? Oh, well, that's a good. Has moon fact killed moon romance? I don't think so at all. I think almost any contemporary book of poetry has references to the moon. I mean, the poetry I just read. The poet I just read, Billy Collins, has a lot of moon poems. I think I do. Everybody does. I mean, I cannot tell you how many people have still feel the same mystery about the moon, or the same connection with melancholy, and also the heart. I think it's something we associate with the nature of love, which a lot of poems describe. So I don't think it's been demystified, even though a lot of us were raised knowing a lot more about it. None of us have been there, so that's a really good question, though.
Is there anywhere in poetry where the moon is maybe looked at in maybe a negative light?
Yes, I think so. I'd have to think about it. I was noticing in my own work how it wasn't always a positive thing at all. I can't really say in general in terms of poetry off the top of my head. Nothing comes to mind, but if I think of anything, I'll grab it off the shelf and read it to you. No. Well, often there's that sense of it. The moon sees everything. The moon knows what's going on, in a way. The moon is always there watching. I think that might be the most common thing I've noticed. Even when we can't see it, we know it's there, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just interesting you were talking about how we see that one side of the moon and we never see the other side. There's an art exhibit right now at the Houston Museum of Fine Arts where there's some globes produced by scientists back in the 18th and 19th centuries, and it's interesting because it's a full globe, but yet only half of it has anything on it.
Oh, cool!
That's all they could see. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Tell me, how does one become the poet laureate of South Carolina?
You're appointed by our famous governor.
Okay.
You like that? That's generally true all over the country. I mean, each state has a different system. I actually met the former Texas poet laureate, who also was kind of a singer. He was a great guy, Steve Fromholtz. I met him years ago. Each state's a little different, but it's usually a governor-appointed position. It's an honorary position. You don't get paid or anything, but it's a really, really wonderful honor. And you have to write poems for public occasions. I haven't written a poem about the moon for a public occasion, but it wouldn't surprise me if I had to at some point. I had to write one for the opening of a bridge. That was pretty cool. Yeah.
Is that a position you hold to you just resign, or like a Supreme Court nomination?
Yeah, in my case, yes, because it's a lifetime appointment. So I either would resign or move or something. And there's a few of them, they're all different. Some states have very elaborate systems and a committee of people. And when I was appointed poet laureate, actually the former poet laureate had died and had not been replaced in a 4-year period by that governor. But then they were putting together the inauguration ceremonies and found that there's always been a poem read at the governor's inauguration in this state. In fact, it's the longest tradition of having that is in South Carolina. So they were very upset that there was no poet laureate to read a poem. So that's how it started. I was asked to write and read a poem for the inauguration, and then I was appointed about a half a year later.
So, like, I just think you're saying you were nominated. Do you have to like turn in a resume, or people just go out and find your work and then?
No, I was just asked to write a special poem for the inauguration, and was happy to do it. I mean, it was kind of a fun experience, and an honor, and just did it. And then I was appointed 6 months later, and you know, there you go.
Does anybody out there in the audience have a question? Or Starman mentions he knows a
John Denver. I remember him.
He was really poet laureate of Colorado. That's pretty cool.
I didn't know that. I heard him play, I remember. He came to Boston when I was in high school. I remember hearing him play. Trying to look at the... No.
So anybody in attendance tonight have a question for Marjory? If you happen to have a microphone, everybody does have microphone privileges right now.
When I read a poem.
I've got...
Oh, no, there's a question?
Sorry. Go ahead and read our poem. That'd be great.
Okay. Let's see. This is another island poem. Very different way that I use the moon. And actually, right when we started, I think Starman was talking about just the cyclical nature and women, and you know, I mean, moon. I don't know how many you know that. Oh, Andrew, you probably know, but moon has a German origin, and it means month. Literally, that's the definition of the word. And the poem I'm going to read is actually set on that island, Sullivan's Island, and also in Maine. And it's a poem about a rape of a young girl. And when I was writing this poem, I was trying to explain that she was so young she hadn't entered adolescence. And I used the moon to explain that. So it's called Red Song in the Night. A woman sitting on a porch swing holds her grandchild and waits for water to pour from the red air that burns around her. Prayers of the living, words for the dead scatter in a storm of blue language. She can lose herself in the roar of the sea and the rain where nothing can be mended. The evening is hot, and summer steam across the open-faced moon ripples like strands of hair. The child sleeps against her breast, his mouth one opening to darkness, exhaling sugar, inhaling stars. She hears blood flowing into bitter petals of geranium gathered in clay pots at her feet. Singing baby boats and silver moon, her voice is deep, thunder. Soon she is lost in the bells of song, remembering the white-gabled house, dead deer dangling from apple trees outside her window, the town where mountains of wood pulp waited at the rail station she could have run to that night when a handful of hours closed in ice at the end of a dirt road. The moon was still not moving through her body, too young to be torn open in a field like a hunted animal, too young to watch snow melting in the streams of her brother's breath as he moved over her, as he pushed himself inside her, semen and blood spilling down her legs. Beyond his body, beyond his hot face, the stars continued to burn, and the earth, frozen in layers of sleep beneath her, continued spinning. Well, that's kind of got a dark connotation, Andrew.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on that.
Yeah. Oh, here's somebody I know.
Great.
Do I think if there's a major difference in Eastern and Western approaches to the moon in poetry? Probably so, but I'd have to really think about it. I'm going to ask Vernon what he thinks. Is that, can I do that? I'm guessing maybe he's noticed some differences, and I'm sure they do exist. I don't consider myself a moon scholar of poetics by any means, but that's a good question.
We'll see if he'll
no, I don't know.
Put something in the chat box there. And in the meantime, here's actually the last question that we had submitted ahead of time.
Oh, okay.
And maybe you've already addressed this, but what was the first poem you wrote that had lunar influence?
I don't think I really was thinking about the moon as an image in my poems until I lived on Sullivan's Island. So it might have been that poem, Hurricane Season, or any number of the poems in that book. I don't. Again, it's really just the simple fact of not, living in a city. The moon just wasn't as present in my life. Living on an island, it's a huge presence. It even seems bigger. So here's Vernon's answer that the East, the moon has more mystery than when the West has more romance. Yeah, I definitely say that in terms of poetry. That's a good way to put it. Yeah, I think so. Interesting. So what did people email you these questions, Andrew? What was it?
Yeah, these were emailed to us ahead of time through the MyMoon website.
Oh. Oh, Starman has to go to dinner. Okay.
Well, okay. Does anybody else out there have a question for Marjory? Well, Starman just raised his hand.
He's got to go. I can read another poem. Let me
Okay.
think. Try to remember the ones that I sent you, Andrew. Give me a minute. I found the moon in almost every poem in this book, so it's really interesting to see the similar connotations. What is that? Oh, this is a long poem. I was just going to read a section of it. It's another island poem, and there's one section about the moon. I'll read the first two sections, and in it, again, it's just talking about the tides and love and that feeling of the things that we can't really control, maybe. So I'll read, it's in two parts. This is Islands, and I don't know if the moon is in the first part, but I'll read it anyway. It's called, the first part is Every Day. I love the way the old oak scatters sunlight across the gray and red tin gatehouse roof. I love the way the rain pools in ruts between the eaves. I love the birds that come. Each morning I watch the purple iridescence spread across the black feathered grackles gathered here to drink. I'd like to live like them, as if light and water were all that I required from the boundless air surrounding me. in the second section. Memorial Day. At the bonfire on the beach, blue and pink lights stream across the sky at sunset. I want to fly into those veins of color spreading over the sea. I love the night that falls upon us suddenly. I love the moon, pulling the sea over flames we have made. Together in the darkness, our hearts are still, and we believe, despite our many wounds, that love can be a simple thing. Out there, beyond the blue-rimmed horizon, anything seems possible. And Vernon just said, you know, that in the West we have that more of a romantic connotation. So, anyway, let's see another one. But again, it's that moon and the tide, and it's almost like I couldn't write about the tides without writing about the moon. And the other image I find in my poems, which was rather exotic to me in the South because I just didn't see it in the Northeast, is just the day moon. You just see a day moon, I don't know how often, but it seems as often as you look for one, you see one. I'd never seen one. You know, it's just where we are, you know, down here near the equator or something. You just, for whatever reason, I don't understand that. But so that figures into a lot of poetry too.
So you should be able to see the moon during the day.
Anywhere?
We certainly can down here.
Yeah. Well, I just think maybe there's less, for whatever reason, I noticed it a lot more down here. And didn't notice it that often. And when I grew up in Boston in the Northeast, I just didn't see it, even if it was there. Harder to see, maybe. I don't know.
Or too many other things to look at.
Perhaps. But the day moon, I think, is that's another. You see that in poetry a lot. There's just something. In the contradiction of it or something, I don't know. It's just very interesting to writers, I think.
That is interesting. I never would have thought about that, but yeah, that yeah.
You know, anything that's kind of seems a little contradictory is always interesting to a poet, I think. So.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, is anybody else have any questions for Marjory?
No.
No? Okay. Well, thank you very much, Marjory, for taking some time out this evening to join us. And
glad to do it.
Recite some poetry for us. And thanks to all of you who signed in to join us. As let you all know, our next webcast will be in 2 weeks from today, and our guest speaker will be Dr. Sarah Noble. She's a lunar geologist, and she'll be talking about, she's also an artist, so she's going to talk about how her science that she does, how it influences her artwork, and kind of vice versa. So that should be pretty interesting. She's our first kind of combo speaker, so to speak, both scientist and artist. So she'll be talking about that. In fact, she'll be down here that week for the Lunar Exploration Analysis Group meeting. So she'll be doing some science, and then so she'll be right in the evening of the 18th to talk about her art and science. So she may have some new ideas after going to this meeting about what she might want to do next in terms of her art. So 2 weeks from today, same time again. So be watching for announcements for that. And then in December, we are 2 speakers. December 2nd, we're going to have Mark Sykes, who's a planetary scientist in Tucson. He's also a space policy expert, and he's going to discuss an alternative for the future of the U.S. Space program that isn't often discussed. He'll be talking about that, and then following him up on December 16th, will be Dr. David Kring from here at the Lunar Planetary Institute, and he'll be talking about the argument for returning to the moon when we send astronauts. So kind of the moon first argument. So that's lined up for the rest of the year, and we are now starting to get folks lined up for next year, starting in January as well.
Cool.
So thank you all again for coming this evening, and thank you again, Marjory. It was great to have you tonight.
Thank you.
And,
it was fun.
Look forward to. Good, good. And we look forward to seeing folks in a couple of weeks.
Sweet. Okay. I'm going to say goodbye to my friend Vernon.
No
Thank
problem.
you. You guys are great.
And Marjorie, we've got a little gift we'd like to send you, and I think we have your address. So.
Well, and I've got to send you back my equipment.
Yes. Well, yeah, and I think you should have the stuff for that. I think you should have a label. And,
yeah. Don't worry about it. Yeah, I saved the box.
Okay. Okay.
Terrific. All right. Well, thanks.
Yeah. Well, you take care, Marjorie.
Cool. Will do. Thanks for everything. You've been great.
Good night.
Night.